housing is a really important part of our carbon footprint. A huge amount of our emissions come from how we live in our houses. So it's absolutely essential that when we build houses now, those houses of course will be there for us to live in for many, many tens, if not even hundreds of years. And during that time they'll be using a lot of energy and potentially emitting a lot of carbon dioxide. That we build these houses for minimum energy consumption, and also, if at all possible, that they actually generate some of their own energy, zero carbon energy, so that these will be zero carbon houses. The way we're building them at the moment is completely irresponsible and is completely out of sync with what our own governments, with what the United Nations have been asking for, what the climate scientists have been suggesting is really important in terms of getting emissions down. So what we're doing, on one hand, we're signing these major international protocols on climate change, and then we're building these houses that are completely at odds with what we're saying we want to do on climate change. And I have repeatedly made the point that when the banks were about to go under, we managed to create, through quantitative easing in the UK, about £375 billion. 375 billion. That's about a third of our GDP, our economic output from the UK. We generated that almost overnight. Now we could then spend that how we wanted. We happened to give it back to the banks as a stimulus package for the economy. Now that didn't particularly work well, or as well as it could have worked. But what we could have done, when we think about it, 375 billion. If you think of the UK, we could have retrofitted every single house that will be here in 2050. Now there are 26 million houses roughly in the UK. About 17 million of those will probably still be here in 2050. We could have retrofitted every single one of those and still had probably 150 billion pounds left. Now what would have happened if we'd retrofitted them? They would have eliminated fuel poverty, would have made them, all of the houses, much lower energy consumption and therefore reduced their carbon emissions, would have made them much more resilient to a changing climate. So as the climate changes, these properties would have been resilient to that. It would have provided a huge amount of employment. A lot of that employment would have been relatively low skilled, so you could have trained people up very quickly, provided they're supervised by people who are highly trained. So that would have been very good for local employment. A lot of the poor quality in houses are in areas where people actually are low skill and have relatively high unemployment. So you'd have, in those areas where the houses need to be improved, you would have already had an available labour force who need jobs. Instead, we gave the money to the banks. We are not short of resources. What we are short of is the courage, the intellect, the thought that is required to use society's existing resources for the benefit of society as a whole in dealing with climate change, but also many other issues as well. So this would have been good as a stimulus package. It would have been good for employment. It would have been good for eliminating fuel poverty. It would have made us a much more resilient society in terms of dealing with climate change going forward. But again, as I say, instead we took the old route of giving the money to the banks.